The invitation to my own granddaughter's first birthday came through a group chat. A group chat with 14 people in it. I found out the way you find out about a sale at the drugstore. Casually, between other things, with no particular expectation that it would matter to you. It did matter to me, but I didn't say that. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding my phone, reading the message from my daughter-in-law 3 times. Lily's first birthday. Saturday the 15th at 2 p.m. Backyard barbecue, nothing fancy. 14 thumbs up emojis from 14 people who were not me. I put the phone face down on the counter and went back to peeling carrots, because that was something my hands knew how to do without my brain getting in the way. My son, Colin, called that evening. He was cheerful in that particular way he gets when he's hoping you won't bring something up. "You saw the message?" he said. "I did, great. So you'll come?" It wasn't a question. That bothered me more than I expected. I told him I'd be there, and I was. I drove 2 hours from Sudbury to their house. In Barrie, I brought a hand-knitted blanket in Lily's favorite yellow. I smiled at every single person at that party, even when I had to remind myself who they were. My ex-husband, Thomas, was there with his girlfriend, Paulette. They'd been together 3 years. She wore the kind of maxi dress that photographs well, and spent most of the afternoon holding Lily in ways that made it easy to take pictures. I am not a petty woman. I want to be clear about that before I go any further. But there is a difference between being gracious and being invisible, and that afternoon I was invisible in the way that furniture is invisible. Present, functional, not worth discussing. Colin pulled me aside near the end by the garage. He had his father's way of starting difficult sentences with nothing, just a breath and a pause long enough that you know something is coming. "Mom. About Thanksgiving." I waited. Paulette's kids are going to be in town. Her daughter just moved back from Vancouver, and this would be the first time we're all together and... He stopped, looked at the grass. "We're doing it at Dad's this year. I think it would be easier." Easier. I had made Thanksgiving dinner in that man's house for 22 years. I had brined the turkey the night before every single time. I knew which element on the stove ran hot, and I knew that his mother liked her cranberry sauce from a can, not homemade, and I had swallowed that without complaint for 2 decades, because you love people the way they need to be loved, not the way you want to love them. But easier. "Okay," I said. "You're not upset?" "I'm fine, Colin." He looked relieved. That was the worst part, actually. How relieved he looked. I drove home that night and I did not cry until I got past the Barrie city limits, which I considered a personal achievement. The highway was dark and the radio was playing something I didn't recognize, and I thought about all the Thanksgivings ahead of me, all the occasions that would be rearranged around Paulette's comfort, all the group chats with 14 people who were not me. I had retired early from my job as a fraud examiner with the Ontario Securities Commission. 31 years. Not many people can say that, and I'm not saying it to brag. I'm saying it because the work shaped how I think. You spend 3 decades looking at the space between what people say and what they actually do, and it becomes instinct. You notice inconsistencies the way other people notice the weather. I noticed things about Paulette. Small things at first. The way she referred to her former career in financial consulting, with enough vagueness to fill a room. The story about her previous house in Muskoka that shifted slightly between tellings. Sometimes she'd sold it, sometimes the market had forced her hand. Once it was a complicated situation with a partner. Thomas had a good pension from 30 years with Ontario Hydro. He had a paid-off house in Barrie. He had the kind of stable, unexciting financial profile that makes a certain kind of person very interested. I am not a jealous woman either. I want to be clear about that too. Thanksgiving came. I spent it with my friend Rosalind, who had lost her husband the previous spring, and who made excellent stuffed squash and did not once make me feel like a charity case. We watched old movies and she fell asleep before 9 and I sat in her living room in the dark and thought, this is fine. This is a perfectly fine life. I mostly believed it. It was the second week of November when my phone rang at 11:47 at night. The name on the screen was Colin, and my stomach dropped the way it does when your child calls after midnight. That animal fear, immediate and total, before your brain catches up with context. Mom, his voice was strange, not crying, something flatter than crying. What happened? Tell me right now. Dad got a call tonight. From the OSC. I sat up. Say that again. The Ontario Securities Commission. They said, Mom, they said there's an investigation into Paulette and that Dad might be. He stopped. I could hear him breathing. They said his accounts may have been used. Without his knowledge. I was already out of bed, standing in the kitchen, turning on the light. Is your father there with you? No, he's at home. I think he's... Mom, I don't know what to do. He called me and he sounded... I've never heard him sound like that. I knew what Thomas sounded like when his world came apart. I had been there once before for it, when his own father died, and he sat in our living room for 3 days unable to speak. I knew the particular silence of Thomas in crisis. Give me an hour, I said. Mom, you don't have to, Colin. Give me an hour. I drove to Barrie in the dark, which is not something I recommend. November in Ontario does not give you anything to look at. Just highway and tree line and the occasional transport truck passing like a lit city moving sideways. I had time to think, which was not entirely welcome. The thing about fraud is that it rarely looks like fraud. That's the whole mechanism. It looks like something else. It looks like love or opportunity or a good investment or a person who understands you in ways your ex-wife never did. It looks like a maxi dress and a baby and a Thanksgiving you weren't invited to. I am not saying I knew. I want to be careful here. But I noticed. Thomas opened the door before I knocked. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a single evening, which in a way he had. He was still in his work clothes, his tie loosened, his face doing something I recognized as Thomas trying very hard not to fall apart in front of another person. You didn't have to come, he said. I know. I made tea. That is what I do in a crisis. I make tea and I organize the facts and I start from what is known and work outward. I had done it in 243 formal investigations, and I did it now in Thomas's kitchen, which still had the same yellow tiles I had picked out in 2001. He told me everything. Paulette had been, in fact, a financial consultant, but what that meant in her case was a very specific thing. She had, over the previous 4 years, cultivated relationships with recently widowed or divorced men in their late 50s and early 60s. Men with pensions, men with home equity, men who were lonely in the way that people are lonely when they've been half of something for a long time and suddenly aren't. She would establish trust slowly, become indispensable, and then, over months, never all at once, direct money. Small transfers at first. Account access framed as convenience. I can handle the bill payments, you shouldn't have to deal with that. Investment opportunities with returns too good and documentation too thin. Thomas had given her access to a joint account they'd opened together 8 months into the relationship. He thought it was for shared household expenses. Over 14 months, she had moved $63,000 out of it. He found out because the OSC had been building a case for 2 years. Paulette had done this before. Different name in one instance. She'd changed it legally, 8 years ago, in Alberta. There was a man in London, Ontario, who had lost his entire retirement savings. There was an elderly widower in Oakville who had taken out a second mortgage he didn't understand he was signing. Thomas was not her first. He was, apparently, her last. The OSC had enough now to move. He sat across from me at the kitchen table where we had eaten 1,000 meals together, and he said, "How did I not see it?" It wasn't a question. It was the kind of sentence you say to the ceiling. She's very good at this, I said. Thomas, this is what she does. This is her profession. I feel like an idiot. You're not an idiot. You're someone who was targeted deliberately by a person who has been practicing this for years. He looked at me for a long moment. Why did you come? I thought about that. The honest answer was complicated. Some of it was Colin's voice on the phone, that flat, frightened sound no child's voice should make. Some of it was 22 years, which don't stop mattering just because you sign a paper. Some of it was that I am who I am, and I have never in my life been able to watch someone drown when I know how to swim. Because you called Colin, I said finally. And Colin called me. He nodded. That was enough. The investigators had requested a formal statement from Thomas, and they asked if he had anyone, a lawyer, an advocate, who could help him understand the process. I knew the OSC's investigative procedures the way I know my own address. I had spent the next morning making calls, getting Thomas connected with a lawyer I trusted, explaining to him, in plain language, what would happen and what his rights were and what he needed to say, and, more importantly, what he did not need to say without counsel present. Colin came in the afternoon. He walked in and saw the two of us at the kitchen table with papers spread between us, and he stopped in the doorway and did something I hadn't seen him do since he was about 14 years old. He started to cry without warning, just suddenly and completely, the way weather changes. I'm sorry, he said. He was looking at me. Mom, I'm so sorry. The thing about Thanksgiving and the birthday party, and I made you feel like you were. I didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't. Colin, I was trying to keep everyone happy and I think I just kept making you. Colin, come sit down. He sat. Thomas handed him a box of tissues without comment, which was the most normal thing that had happened in 24 hours and made all three of us laugh in that slightly unhinged way. You laugh when you've been frightened and tired for too long. We sat there for a while, the three of us, in a kitchen that used to be mine and then wasn't, and it was strange and sad and also, underneath all of that, something that felt like the real shape of things. Like what we actually were to each other, under all the performance of what we were supposed to be. Paulette was arrested on a Thursday. The charge was fraud over $5,000 under the criminal code, which in Canada carries a maximum sentence of 14 years, though the lawyers said the realistic outcome for a first prosecution, the Alberta case had not resulted in charges, only a civil settlement, would be something lower. She was also facing a civil suit from at least 2 of the prior victims, and the OSC was pursuing a lifetime trading ban and full restitution orders. Thomas got most of his money back. Not all of it. Some had already moved through accounts that were harder to trace, but the investigative freeze had caught the majority before it could be fully dispersed. His lawyer told him to expect a restitution order as part of Paulette's sentencing, though collecting on such orders takes time. He did not lose his pension. I want to say that clearly because I know that was his deepest fear, sitting at that kitchen table that night. Not the money, really, but the pension, the thing he'd worked 30 years for, and that stood between him and an uncertain old age. The pension was untouched. What he lost was harder to name, a relationship he had believed in, a version of his own future that he'd been building in his head for 3 years. The particular loneliness of being deceived by someone you trusted is different from other loneliness. It has a specific texture, a specific aftertaste. I knew something about loneliness, but I couldn't know about that one. I tried to tell him that and he said, I know you don't feel sorry for me. I feel sorry for you, I said. That's why I'm here. He thought about that. That's a very decent thing for you to do. Well, I said, I'm a very decent person. He smiled at that. It was the first time I'd made him smile since I'd arrived, and it felt like something loosening, like the first thaw after a long winter that you'd started to believe might not end. Thanksgiving the following year was at Colin's house. Small. Just the 4 of us. Colin and his wife Jade, Lily in her high chair decimating a dinner roll with great personal satisfaction, and me. I brought a pumpkin pie from the bakery on Elgin Street because I had decided some battles are not worth fighting, and a good bakery pie is not a defeat. Thomas was not there. He was, as far as I knew, having a quiet holiday on his own, which I thought was probably what he needed. We had reached a kind of understanding that I don't have a good word for. Not friendship exactly, not what we used to be, something that acknowledged the full weight of 22 years without trying to carry it all at once. Colin made the turkey himself for the first time. It was, I say this with genuine surprise and maternal pride, very good. At one point Lily grabbed my finger with both her tiny hands and held on with the seriousness of someone conveying important information, and I thought about the birthday party, and the group chat with 14 people, and the drive home past the Barrie city limits, and the feeling of being furniture. I am not furniture. I looked at my granddaughter, who had my eyes and Colin's stubbornness and a future I intended to be present for, and I thought, you have to keep showing up, even when they tell you not to. Especially then. You show up, you tell the truth, and you let everything else sort itself out. That's not wisdom I invented. It's just what happened to me, and what I've decided to do with it.